Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. Perryn Keys here hanging out with it's just going to be a one-on-one. It's going to be an intimate conversation today with Wilson Alexander.
How you doing, Perryn?
Although we can get into some hate speech directed towards Scott Rabelais, who is going to have a much better week than we are, since he's off stuffing himself with pimento cheese sandwiches probably right now as we speak in Augusta, watching the Masters. You can't wipe the smile off of Rab's face.
Can I have his assignment next year?
We should set it out. I should put it out to bid. You guys are going to have to bid on this thing, don't you think?
Oh, man. Well, Rab's going to outbid everybody on that.
Well, we could do like a flex off or something, see, and then you'd been going away. Let's get this thing back on the rails very quickly. We're here to discuss spring football. The spring football game, the LSU spring game, is going to come up here at 1 o'clock on Saturday in Tiger Stadium. And it's been a while since we talked a little bit of football, and everybody's obviously going to be interested in Brian Kelly year 3. So what better time and what better person here, obviously, to have other than Wilson Alexander, our lead LSU football beat reporter.
And gain a little insight into, okay, what is this schematically? How does it work? What is Blake Baker's philosophy? And also just kind of like who is making a move up or down the depth chart, that kind of thing is what we've been able to kind of glean so far.
And certainly with a new staff, you expect that maybe some players who were, not stars or not starters, maybe going to get they have a chance to impress a new staff and get sort of a fresh start. So that's not surprising. I would like to go back just for a little bit and touch on the running game, and for that matter, screens and all those types of things, using a tight end, which we've discussed before. But this is something you have to do really out of necessity. You can't ask Garrett Nussmeier to be Superman like Jaden Daniels was, and he can run, but he's certainly not going to run the same way Jaden did. And so you have to go back to maybe, hate to put it like this, but maybe some sort of a more traditional, old-fashioned running game.
No, absolutely. And it's like we mentioned Jaden being Superman. It's like Garrett's could be a superhero, just a different one.
That's right.
Maybe he's Batman or something.
Yeah.
Like it's just like a different kind of skill set. And so because of that, the LSU's putting in this new run game, and it's also partially not just that Garrett's skill set is different from Jaden, because they probably would have the same kind of running game if the exact same quarterback coming in behind Jaden had his skill set, was a runner kind of thing. But so Garrett not being that same kind of running quarterback, plus what I'm about to say now, the offensive line being such a strength, they really want to lean on that group. And so it's going to be a much more traditional run game in order to be like, okay, well, our strength is in the offensive line, so let's use that to our advantage. There's people within the program who think that Will Campbell and Emory Jones are going to be two of the best 5 or so offensive linemen who've ever come through LSU.
And that's a mouthful, too.
Yeah. And, I mean, when you have those kinds of players and Miles Frazier and Garrett Dellinger coming back, seasoned guys, real quick, Frazier's played now on the offense. Him and Will Campbell are tied for the most starts over the last 2 years.
I guess that's right.
Yeah,
that
like he's
sense,
played
right?
a lot of football.
Sure.
You don't think of him as much as maybe you think of Will Campbell, but like out of all the offensive players, they both have 26 starts over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And so like when you have all that, they're going to this run game that looks that's probably one of the most noticeable differences when you look at this team at practice. It's just how different the run game is. It's I think it's going to be fascinating to just kind of see how that translates, what they're able to build off of that too. We've seen them do a lot of play action rollout as kind of building off of that run game this spring too. And it's so is it going to be successful or not? Is LSU going to have a successful run game? We don't know, but it's certainly going to look different.
Well, we can't expect it to be it's just not possible it's not fair to expect that they're going to have as explosive an offense. Nobody's going to have an explosive offense like last year, but doesn't mean it can't be a whole hell of a lot more, effective, number one, very effective, number one, and paired with what we assume is going to be a little bit better defense. It only makes sense that all this stuff can work well together.
Still be the word there, because they got to go and do it before you can really make an assumption.
And there's a lot to put together too. Again, it's an entirely new defensive staff, and of course we'll get to this later because we're going to get deep into the defense here in a little bit, but. Certainly a lot of moving pieces right now too, in addition to waiting for some other pieces to get here. But first things first, let's talk about a piece that's been here for quite a while. Kyren Lacy. It's got to be, for those who haven't paid attention, maybe as much as they've been paying attention to women's basketball, baseball, things of that nature right now. It's been pretty evident to you, Wilson, that, and evident, I mean, look, Brian Kelly said it. He has said, I'm quoting, he has really set a high bar for everybody. And it looks for everything like he's about to make that big turn, make a big, sort of turning the corner and be that complete receiver that you hope you have. And then, of course, if you add him to the mix of Zavion Thomas, who'll be coming in, and C.J. Daniels, who'll be coming in, and, of course, some of these youngsters behind them in the depth chart as well. Just tell us about Kyren Lacy and why it looks so good right now.
Everything about what Kyren has done is consistent this spring. And whereas last year, Brian Kelly said, really the last 2 years, it was not always that case, up and down. He had some drops that we saw during the season.
Certainly.
But also just the way he practiced was he had a tendency sometimes to get distracted. Mm-hmm. And that hasn't been the case this offseason at all. Really, since coming back from the bowl game, everybody around the program has seen a different Kyren Lacy. And, they think part of that is because last year, playing alongside Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, seeing the way these two soon-to-be first-round picks practice and approach things kind of rubbed off on Kyren. And he learned, from them a little bit about practice habits. He also just, naturally matured and developed. And now he's going in. He's a senior. He's played a lot of college football. He knows this is his year to possibly star. And he's taking advantage of it right now.
That's what I was about to. That was what I was going to sort of piggyback off. I was just like, well, now he's actually gotten up. It's not to say he didn't have plenty of opportunities to shine over the last couple of years, but it's his opportunity right now because Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors are not in front of him. He's got that chance to, especially in the spring here, before the new additions come in. He really does have that chance to really kind of.
Well, they're here.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you're right, but. To be here in the program is sort of so many, this is going to go, I'm going way back now, and so I apologize to all the younger viewers, but Abram Booty came here. He was a star freshman receiver from Evangel, and he came in and he got there for spring practice as, what would have been a high school senior, but the light bulb didn't come on for him until he came back into the fall. And so there's been plenty of cases since then, over and over and over, but that's sort of what I'm getting at. He's the vet going into this spring practice. So
he absolutely is. And just to sort of further emphasize how good he's been. Every pretty much highlight play that the offense has made has come from him, that we've been able to see anyway. There was a catch over the top of Bradyn Gilbert a couple weeks ago. He had a really smooth grab down the sideline. PJ Woodland's got tight coverage on him, and he still manages to, I think, make the catch. It was hard to tell from our vantage point if he kept a foot in bounds, but he might have been completed down the sideline, and it was either way. It's kind of irrelevant in the spring whether or not he did, kind of thing. And and then like we said at practice just this past Saturday, especially during the team period. He made this one grab, just runs a hitch route. There's tight coverage around him. PJ, I think, was pretty close behind him. Maybe another player kind of underneath. And Garrett throws it up for him to go get it, and makes jumps to make the catch, comes down, breaks a tackle, huge gain. Offense scores the next play because it's right at the goal line, kind of thing. And he's been the catalyst for them offensively at this point in the spring whenever they're doing something. And Brian Kelly's words are that Brian Kelly thinks he's gonna have a breakout season. And it makes sense. LSU pitched him last year for coming back as, could he have gone and gotten drafted? Maybe he's maybe he's a 5th or 6th round pick kind of thing. But, they pitched him on come back, be wide receiver 1, do what Malik and Brian Thomas did last year because you've got that chance. And right now, he looks like he is going to be able to put himself in position for that. And part of the point, of those other receivers, if we want to get into that whole position group real quick for a second, C.J. Daniels and Zavion Thomas, like you said, coming in, they're still learning the offense, but we did start to see a lot more of them in this past Saturday's practice being incorporated into the first team offense now that they're kind of catching up. And even though they maybe haven't been stars this spring necessarily, you can tell that they played a lot of football. They've certainly got talent. We saw LSU on Saturday use Zavion on a jet sweep, so that's something that you might see him do in the fall. I think CJ is going to end up being a really good player for them. And it's just going to be like Joe Sloan said when we talked to him last week. He thinks that come fall camp, they're going to have really big preseason camps because to your point, they'll have been in the offense longer. And as they get closer to the season, they'll have a better grasp of it.
Do you ever have, and we'll move off the receivers here in just a moment, but since we're talking about it, do you have I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, but do you have some good comps for Zavion Thomas and C.J. Daniels? Anybody off the top of your head that would,
interesting.
just in terms of playing style and things of that nature? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's tough to answer. It's tough to. I would need to come back and think of comps maybe closer to this season, but at least to describe their play style. Zavion's like 5'11". He's that slot receiver, fast, shifty. He's really good, Joe Sloan said, at sort of feeling and understanding space and using it.
Which would make sense having played for Mike Leach.
Yeah, and he's also a natural punt returner. He's good when he gets into the open field. Yeah,
I'm sorry to cut you off. That can come in handy.
Yes, they could use that. And then CJ is more of like your downfield receiver. You know, he's got a little bit of speed to stretch the defense vertically, but even more so than just like natural speed, he's just really good at going up and getting the ball in the air. I think that's probably one of his main strengths. We saw him do that time and again at Liberty last year. I'm suddenly forgetting the number, but his like average depth of target was maybe around 15 yards. And so that's kind of what you're expecting out of him, is to be somebody who can go down the field and stretch it in that way. And then Zavion is almost more of like your short to intermediate route kind of player. Gosh, I wish I could think of a comp right off the top of my head to those play styles, but that's at least their play styles.
Give you a better feel for who these guys are and how they all might fit together in the offense. So let's talk about the defense a little bit. Again, lots of question marks, lots of moving pieces, lots of people, and which is certainly good. It's good to have numbers when you're trying to sort of figure everything out. We'll start with the defensive ends. I think we would all agree that maybe Bradyn Swinson, of the younger defensive ends, he might, well, I say younger, newer, I guess would be a better way to put it. He seemed to flash maybe more than most, and we can talk about his progress. But also Paris Shands, he came on toward the end of last season and got to play a little bit more. But Paris Shand, you were able to have, what I consider a fun, intriguing story about up at theadvocate.com.
It was a fun conversation with him.
Yeah, Paris Shand seems like he seems like a thoughtful individual, as you would expect any Canadian to be. And anyway, just tell us about some of the tell us a little bit about the new approach he's taking and has brought in this offseason.
Well, I do want to go back to the receivers real quick for one thing.
Oh, okay.
For once, just to say that Chris Hilton's had a really consistent spring as well, and that's somebody else we would be remiss not to mention as sort of one of those standouts.
Also good news.
He's in the program for a few years, been playing really well this spring. Okay, back to Paris Shand. Yes, Paris is certainly a deep thinker, someone who likes to try to, as the person who he's working with now as a mental coach described him, a knowledge seeker. He has always been interested in the human brain and just kind of how it works. He said that he's majored in political science because he thinks he might be interested in international law at some point whenever his playing career ends. But he actually is like, I kind of wish now that I majored in psychology, because he is really fascinated by just like how the mind works. And he was asking himself this offseason, how can I get better at football with my mind? Because he wanted to improve his reaction time and his processing speeds after having, like you said, a strong second half to last season as kind of that backup defensive end behind Zavion Jones. Even probably flashed more than Zavion did last year at times.
I agree.
And he thought, like, okay, physically you could do some things, but he thought that maybe this path would help him a little bit in terms of being able to anticipate kind of like what offenses are doing, and like I said, improve his reaction time so that he has that little split-second edge on an offensive lineman, regardless of whatever pass rush move he's using. So he's been working with a mental coach out of Toronto, his hometown, and they have gone through this sort of 4-step program that works on breath work, meditation, visualization, and then understanding inner energy. And all of it is designed to try to help him reach what's called a flow state during games, or as people would think about it, just be in the zone,
right? Like
hyper focused, to where you almost sort of not black out necessarily, but like distractions are not coming into your mind. You're so zeroed in on what you're doing that he thinks it might help him improve. And so, we'll see, because he's someone who is probably one of LSU's best 5 pass rushers. I would say he's probably in that group. We saw him in a pass rush package that LSU used on third down on his practice on Saturday. And if he can continue to improve upon the flashes that we saw last year, then he could end up probably being a pretty darn good player this fall.
You, Wilson, for those of our viewers and listeners who don't know, you are a pretty clean liver and a clean eater. Would you be interested in some of the concoctions Perryn happens to be putting together with his juicer, his new juicer?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily. I would try the one that he actually said doesn't taste great because he bought a $40 juicer off of Amazon because part of all this he's thinking, okay, if I can improve my hydration, then I can kind of improve my mental focus, which that makes sense.
It makes total sense.
Yeah, and so instead of just drinking more water, he's doing natural fruit and vegetable juices. And so he says he goes in with thirds and buys like 10 cucumbers at a time to make this cucumber juice.
Cucumber, cayenne.
Yeah, it's cucumber, cayenne, turmeric, cilantro, a few other things go, and there's some apples, I think, and some other stuff goes in there to make like a green juice of some kind. And
sounded awful.
He said he goes, that doesn't taste great. He likes the one that he made that was like just I think like basically apples and strawberries kind of thing, which sounds more like maybe like a smoothie of some kind. I don't know. He's been using his juicer quite a bit. I would try the cucumber, and I would try the apple strawberry. And it sounds very basic. I just think I would like the cucumber more than he probably did. But I like cucumbers. So
God bless. I mean, I do too. I don't know if I like drinking them though. So God bless all you guys though. I should be a better eater and a cleaner eater, but I'm not doing that. Sorry. Bradyn Swinson, how has he looked in the limited time that you've been able to check him out?
We haven't gotten like a great sense of Bradyn. Like I haven't been able to get a great sense of Bradyn this spring. Really, I mean, like. We know this. He's been the first team defensive end alongside Zavion Jones. And for people who are catching up on Blake Baker's defense, there's not a jack linebacker per se anymore. At least that's not what they call it.
Right.
So like what he is going to be doing this year is a little bit different from when LSU had the jack linebacker the last couple of years. It's almost like they have like a big defensive end and a small defensive end. You look back at Missouri's depth chart last year, that's exactly what it was. You had a bigger defensive end on one side. Yeah. And then if you look back on the other side, it's like a smaller defensive end who's basically Paris's size. Mm-hmm. So we've seen him at times be, hand in the dirt defensive end, which he did not do last year. Those jack linebackers were, stand up 2-point stance edge rushers. Brian Kelly also calls them like a drop linebacker. And he still uses that phrase sometimes to describe this player. But we've seen them, like I said, hand in the dirt sometimes. Also sometimes standing up on the end. They'll probably do a few different things with that position and who's ever is in it. And so Perryn hasn't necessarily, from when we've been out there, made like some incredible pass rush and, make the play. But we've had a limited viewing. I think the most important thing to note about him in that position in general is that he is the starter there for sure. And then Dashawn Womack is kind of right behind him. And they'll use Dashawn on like those third down pass rush packages. The one that we saw this past Saturday saw a couple different versions of it with Bradyn and Dashawn and then Perryn and the other player was Harold Perkins. Okay. Kind of on like it had like Perryn and Bradyn kind of in the middle as like inside rushers, bringing some of those defensive ends inside and then using like Dashawn and Harold on the edge and kind of, I think, an example of how Blake Baker is going to be maybe creative with his defensive front on third down in particular, bringing in some of those pass rush packages.
Having Perkins in a pass rush capacity will be comforting news, I'm sure, to many of the LSU fans. Let's talk about the defensive tackles. At the moment, Jacobian Guillory, fifth-year senior, has been, in Kelly's words, or was it Blake Baker's words, one way or the other, somebody said he was outstanding against the run.
Brian Kelly's words, yes.
Okay, outstanding against the run. And then Kimo Makane'ole, who's evidently made some progress too. Maybe they don't wind up being the starting defensive tackles on September 3rd against USC, but nonetheless, here's where they are right now. And it's got to be news of both of those guys playing well has to be also comforting news to LSU fans, I would think.
Yeah, we can definitely say I think that Jacobian's playing well because at least Brian Kelly says he's playing well against the run. And he was very effusive in his compliments to Jacobian Guillory's ability to stop the run this spring and how he's progressed under Bo Davis, and basically said that like you can kind of pencil him in as a guy right now, and they're looking for the other one. That second defensive tackle. And right now, lately, Kimo Makane'ole, the converted offensive lineman, has been playing in that first-team defense a lot. is that going to stick?
Right.
We'll see. We've also, Jalen Lee has been in the mix there. Shone Washington, junior college transfer, has been kind of on the second team defense. And then you've also got, Demiron Johnson's an early enrollee who I think is still probably kind of getting up to speed. He hasn't really been a factor in that competition at all. Preston Hickey is a former walk-on. He's been with the second team defense as well. I don't think I'm forgetting anybody because they don't have a whole lot of guys at this point at that defensive tackle spot.
Right.
But I think maybe the most encouraging thing from all that is, okay, Jacobian, maybe he's made some progress and can be certainly a player on first and second down. But like Brian Kelly also kind of said in there, I was like, they're going to have to be able to generate a pass rush on first and second down. He seems to feel better about what they can do on third down because of that package we mentioned a minute ago. Blake's ability to utilize his best pass rushers, which LSU didn't do a good job of last year at all. And they were terrible on third down.
Yes.
But you got to get to that. And so, that second defensive tackle spot, like we said, kind of right now, Kimo's in it. But I think both defensive tackle spots are going to be a little bit of a different personnel come preseason camp. They've already added Gio Paez from Wisconsin.
Correct.
I would expect them to add one, if not 2 to 3 defensive tackles in the second portal window.
Right.
And which opens up April 16th. And so, like, pretty much a couple days after spring ball. So it's hard to really say, have a definitive view of the defensive tackles at this point because it's like the personnel that's going to be there isn't necessarily there.
And this
yet.
goes back to spring practice. It's clear that spring practice is not a complete depiction of what the team is going to look on the field. And no place more so than defensive tackle, where you've got who you've got in the spring. You expect, and I'm sure LSU hopes that a average to above average to very good defensive tackle hits the market. And they would behoove them to do everything they can to bring one of those guys in. Gio Paez, I think it's nice to have somebody, it's nice to have another guy. Yeah. But again, it's a converted defensive end when he gets here. So
yeah, kind of. I mean, they called him a defensive end at Wisconsin, but this is somebody who's 6'3" and 310 pounds. He's got a defense. And he kind of played like the sort of techniques and like alignments that he played at Wisconsin. He said in interviews recently, like he basically is going to be doing that at LSU. So like I don't think it's going to be like a big departure from what he was doing at Wisconsin. It should be kind of a natural transition into that defensive tackle spot, at least from like an alignment and assignment perspective.
Right. But now, just to be clear, and I don't mean this in a mean-spirited way, obviously, but I think what does he have? Something like 35 career tackles or something like that.
Yeah, around there.
I mean, it's not we're not talking about somebody who's had 200 career tackles and 41 tackles for loss or something like that. No,
certainly not. But he, to his credit, in an optimistic view of it, he had his best year last year where he played in 13 games with 6 starts. And so if he can continue to build on that under Bo Davis, then maybe you at least have somebody who's a factor in your 2 deep.
And again, you need guys, and he's another guy at the very least. It's good for LSU to continue to add at that position. This is the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all our writers' great work. That's at theadvocate.com. Please subscribe to The Advocate if you have not already, whether that's in print or digital or some sort of combination of both. You can go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. There's always something going on at LSU. We know that. We haven't seen, every time we think it's going to slow down and quiet down, there's some sort of a fresh slice of controversy coming down the line. So one way or the other, obviously there's so many teams that are doing fair to exceptional on campus. And so, of course, it always means there's going to be a lot of news. And to stay up with all that news, to get your arms around it and get it all delivered in one place, get our LSU newsletter delivered straight to your inbox. It's a 7-day-a-week newsletter. Scott Rabelais handles that 3 times a week. So get it sent to your inbox. Sign up at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here on the LSU Sports Insider every Monday and Thursday. We're here on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube, you should be able to find it. You can subscribe. That way you won't miss an episode, and you can catch us live every Monday and Thursday. But if you don't catch us live, you can catch us there on that YouTube channel after the fact. And if you don't dig YouTube, you don't dig our other social channels, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. Search for the LSU Sports Insider. Okay, so let's talk about the secondary for a little bit. again, we've discussed, of course, many times before that cornerback is a situation where, unlike last year, if they don't have clear-cut starters, which they might, but if they don't have clear-cut starters, we know for a fact that they've got options. They've got options upon options. And one of those options that maybe is a little bit surprising that he's come on this early is P.J. Woodland. I'd be curious if you could tell us a little bit about him.
3-star signee out of Mississippi who enrolled early and has kind of shot up the depth chart. PJ is a guy who coaches describe as at the end of, like, above all else competitive. And he's got some length to him. He's really slim, which is not shocking for an early freshman. Sure. But that hasn't necessarily held him back from being here in the mix. I mean, he is playing on the first team defense consistently over the last week in particular. Blake Baker said that these last few practices, or 4 or so practices, had been really impressed with P.J. Woodland. Somebody who's physical, not afraid to, he tries to play the ball, not afraid to get his hat in there and, try to make a play. And like we saw, I mentioned him earlier in this context, like Kyren Lacy might have made the catch down the sideline at practice on Thursday, but PJ was like on his hip and had an arm across him. And it was more so impressive that Kyren made the catch than PJ didn't have coverage. So is this a product of, is this sort of like almost like the Ashton Stamps last fall where it's like,
That's
Ashton
exactly
Stamps coming in as a freshman and look how great he is. That ended up being sort of two things. Ashton was ready to play at times as a freshman, especially down the end of the season, and he might end up being a starting cornerback this year. But it was also a product of LSU not having a lot of that cornerback room being in shambles. So I think this one is probably it's hard to say like what is the cause of it. Is it that LSU doesn't have the corners that it needs, or is PJ really just having this good of a spring coming in? Let's take the optimistic view because it's spring practice. Why not? Hope springs eternal in the spring. That will that PJ could be a player for them maybe even as a freshman, and at least throughout his career. It's a great sign that coming in as an early enrollee, Certainly. He's able to get on the field and make be a part of this competition. Elsewhere, it isn't. We don't get a full complete picture of this cornerback room right now. In terms of, Ashton has been out there consistently as a first team corner. Javion has been out there a lot. He's gotten a lot of starting reps as well. But then like J.K. Johnson has been limited at times. We saw him now on the second team defense. As maybe he starts to get kind of fully healthy again. And then Zy Alexander has been...
He's not back
he's out.
Yet, right?
He's got an ACL. And like Brian Kelly, when I spoke to him before spring practice, said that the expectation is he'll be able to compete in summer workouts and then be able to, that would put him on track to be a participant in fall camp. But this is somebody who still is coming off an ACL.
Right.
Like that's all... none of that is definitive.
If he came all the way back and played like he did, you'd feel pretty good about it. But there's just no way to know yet.
Yeah, exactly. He'll be at the start of the season 8 months out from surgery. So there's, but at least like you said, PJ is making a move and has put himself firmly in that competition. And we'll kind of just continue to see how it shakes out in fall camp because they're going to bring in a few freshmen at that time over the summer who could maybe be a factor in there. But
Jair
these guys
Brown.
and Jair Brown hasn't necessarily stood out to this point, but maybe he does in preseason camp again.
He's another option.
Yeah, and so we'll just kind of see. That's kind of where it stands at the moment. But I think it's subject to change a good bit between now and the opener.
You would think that there's no way to go but up, and if there is some other way to go, then that's you're talking about being down bad.
Yeah, and honestly, the big thing that you can probably take away at this point, the definitive thing you can take away, is that coverage wise, LSU is going to be much more of a man coverage team.
Yeah.
That is something that you can actually kind of hang on to a little bit more so than who's actually going to be playing that man coverage. We'll see, but Blake Baker said this is somebody who is aggressive style defense. As we'll be explaining, I think probably more so throughout the course of the offseason. He said the other day at the coaches clinic, the number one goal for them is havoc. They want to be aggressive, get downfield, and get after the quarterback. Exactly. And they want it. He's like, in an ideal world, when asked about his coverage philosophy, he'd have, man coverage across the board. That's not always realistic.
Right.
And you have to be able to, he said, if you cut me open, we'd be a man coverage team. But he also understands, like, you got to fit what you're doing to your personnel. if this personnel isn't capable of playing man all the time, then they're not going to be able to do that constantly. You wouldn't do that constantly anyway, because you got to mix up.
You don't
want
to be predictable. Yeah.
But that would be what they predominantly are, and you see that them working on that a lot. This is not a team now that is going to line up 10 yards off the ball, drop into soft zones, and then just bail in order to avoid getting beat
Burned.
deep.
Yeah.
And then give up constantly over and over again, like 10 to 12 yard stop routes. They're going to play a little bit more man, be on guys, and PJ's a person who seems to be adept at doing that. And also, just as a quick other thing, we see Corey Raymond teaching it a lot, teaching that press man coverage from day one at spring ball. We've been seeing them work on it.
I remember we talked about this last summer, almost ad nauseum, about, you don't know what you have. This is talking about last year's team. You don't know what you have at corner, and so, boy, it's going to be incumbent upon that front seven to put some pressure on the quarterback. And boy, did that not happen? Certainly enough to offset what they had going on there. Again, going back to what you were saying.
We were naive, or I don't know. It was, or maybe everything was just that bad.
We had questions about it going in, and those questions, were valid as it turned out. They were really, really valid. Let's discuss the rest of the safety position before we get to Dashawn McBryde and Jardyn Gilbert, Sage Ryan, and all that. I was hoping that you could be able to sort of. Major Burns is going to have a new role. Looks like this year he's going to move to the star position, which is obviously a new position, something that Blake Baker uses. I was hoping, first of all, that you could just sort of lay out what the star position does in this defense.
Yeah, so the star is kind of a hybrid defensive back, sort of almost like a third linebacker at times, because it's closer down to the box.
Box safety.
Yeah, and it's someone who can play coverage. Sometimes has the role of like what a nickel would do, but sometimes it's going to be more of a linebacker kind of thing. And Major, they think, is well suited for that spot. This is someone who's got a lot of length. LSU's coaches, as you continue to see this star position under Blake Baker in years ahead, they kind of like length at that spot. But what that position does will again sort of be like, if it's more of a nickel or if it's more of a linebacker, will kind of depend on who the player is in that spot. And you kind of move it around in terms of what they're asked to do based upon the skill set of the person in that. Major is someone who's probably they think is going to be a little bit better at playing closer to the line of scrimmage, being near the football, where he can come down and cover a tight end, but he can also kind of help in run defense, kind of get his hat in there. They think he's a pretty good blitzer. And that could end up maybe, optimistic view in spring practice. Maybe that's something that kind of helps him play his best football. Because we saw Major at times last year. This is somebody who was at LSU's leading tackler, 93 tackles, but that was kind of a product of the front seven not being able to stop anybody. Things way too often getting to the second level. And he had his moments where he struggled with his pursuit angles, struggled with tackling in space. And so if you take out this amount of space that he has to deal with, also somebody who Brian Kelly said times last year wasn't great in coverage. If you kind of condense the space that he's playing in, maybe that'll help him play a little bit better.
He's not afraid to be physical, but it doesn't mean that, he was. I guess, not to take a shot at the young man, but he was sloppy, I guess, might be the best way to put it in terms of what he was. Brian
Kelly essentially said that. But Brian Kelly also on Saturday said that he's seen Major improve in coverage more than anybody else on this team since last year. This was in response to a question just like who has stood out to you, and he took a minute to highlight Major, and so that's a good sign for him, and maybe the star position will help bring that out of him more.
So tell us about Dashawn McBryde, obviously one of the top-ranked signees in this most recent class, maybe giving himself the possibility of pushing Jardyn Gilbert, the Texas A&M transfer, and Sage Ryan at both of these safety positions, which is apparently where they're going to be. Yeah,
Sage has moved back to safety. LSU thinks that's his natural position, and it's what he kind of came in as. He's got somewhat of the body type of a nickel, but safety is something he played a good bit in high school and has always, and it seems to be well suited for him because he's forced a good bit of turnovers. Had one day where he had 3 interceptions, and Jardyn is a Texas A&M transfer who, Baton Rouge native, who made 10 starts in 2022 at Texas A&M. And so while I don't see Dashawn necessarily unseating either of those guys right off the bat, I think he's going to push them for playing time. He's still an early enrollee, kind of getting used to everything on the defense, but like he's already on the second team defense, like pretty quickly.
Pretty good for a guy who was, going to the homecoming dance 6 months ago.
He and Jordan Allen have been the two second-team safeties, and Dashawn just physically stands out. And especially at a practice a couple of weeks ago, and then again not too long ago, like you watched him play, and you're like, this guy's he's going to be pretty good. At least you think so. He's long, especially as he adds probably some more weight to his frame. Which it seems like he's already added a little bit since he got to high school, but as he continues to kind of build a little bit of bulk, he reminds me in some ways in terms of like watching him play almost like Grant Delpit.
Interesting.
In terms of like, here's a comp for you. Maybe I'm off base on that. I would be interested, to talk to people who maybe know Dashawn better if they would agree. But having watched that 2019 defense with how Delpit was able to come down and play close line scrimmage at times and just like run and just do a lot of different sort of things and be dynamic and disruptive, especially more so, I guess, in 2018 even than in 19. Dashawn somewhat reminds me of that. I think he's going to have a really good career and looks like someone who can at least push for playing time and be a part of that rotation kind of right off the bat.
That's certainly an encouraging sign, and as we know, there are always encouraging signs in the spring when none of this stuff gets has gotten put to the test in live fire, so to speak. Speaking of which, just tell us that this is sort of the $1 million question. This is what I think maybe the average casual fan would love to know the most about, which is Harold Perkins. Obviously, again, you don't get to see all of practice all the time, but how do you suppose? Do we know anything more about how he's going to be used, how he looks? Will they find different ways to utilize him? All those sorts of things. All the $1 million questions about Harold Perkins.
Yeah, it's some people be like, "You buried the lead." That's all we want to know about. But the reason that I think we probably waited a while to talk about him is because there isn't as much new to say about what Harold's doing at inside linebacker that people didn't already know at the start of the spring when we all learned that he'd be playing inside linebacker. What we've seen thus far is really just Blake Baker working with him a lot on technique, trying to ensure that as an inside linebacker, he knows what he's doing. Blake actually recruited Harold in 2021. And then, Blake wasn't retained, and the staff that came in was able to get him to flip from Texas A&M. But he said that during that recruiting process, they pitched a vision for what he was going to do, which was kind of playing inside linebacker, a position that Blake Baker noted he didn't even play in high school.
Right.
But off of that, really be used as kind of this all-around linebacker who could sort of do a few different things and be versatile. And like we said, be on that third down pass rush package because he's such a natural speed off the edge kind of guy. And in Blake's words, he's like, maybe this is kind of all coming around full circle finally. And what we pitched him in 2021, we can start to do with him here. And you hear what LSU, you hear the same sort of things that LSU was talking about last year, which is making him more versatile.
Exactly.
Teams not being able to know where he's coming from, letting him get downhill and get after the quarterback at times. And so I think everybody is probably a little bit hesitant to buy in that this year it's really going to work.
No, that's a good way of putting it.
But that's still what they're committed to doing.
Right.
They do. I do think that Blake has the kind of defense that we've seen at Missouri the last few years that could be capable of fostering this with Harold and bringing this out of him and actually using him in these different kinds of ways to, be an inside linebacker and sometimes be in the box, but not just leave him stuck in the box.
Right.
And kind of let him be able to move him around and try to highlight his strengths and his speed. But again, we're going to have to kind of let it play. I think everybody sort of knows these things, and we're not going to really know one way or another if it works until kickoff on September against USC.
Blake Baker's coming from Missouri. It's going to be Missouri is a show me state. I think everybody's going to say, hey, you're going to have to show me before I believe that that Harold Perkins can be the real deal in all these sort of different, multifaceted roles, I guess would be the best way to put it. Anything you want to sort of wrap up here with this? We're, I guess, 5 days away. This is as of midday Monday. We're 5 days away from everybody getting to see a little bit of dress rehearsal and walking out of Tiger Stadium, maybe a little bit optimistic, as is always the case in a spring game. So anything that we haven't really touched on that we ought to know about these guys at this point?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
we've sort of hit on everything.
We can break down the
Perryn.
kickers later, I suppose.
Well, that is one thing. It's sort of a subtle storyline that people aren't really talking about, but maybe we'll get a better idea in this spring game if they are going to be content with what they have at punter.
Yeah.
And now they have Peyton Todd, who's coming back, maybe finally going to be the punter. But we watched practice on Saturday, and it wasn't a great showing. They've also got a walk-on who's come in as a freshman, I think, who is in that as well. But I'll be interested to see how Peyton does in Tiger Stadium on Saturday, because you don't want to have to think about your special teams, but you also the only time you think about it is if it's a problem. You just don't want it to be a problem. So you just kind of maybe the spring game can help confirm that he's ready for being the starting full-time punter for the first time in his career.
If not, maybe they'll spend the summer checking out the club rugby team at LSU to see if they can't have somebody do a little bit of rugby punts. The spring game is going to be here upon us within 5 days. Again, speaking to you from midday Monday. That's when we're speaking to you right now. And so we will check out what there is to be seen at the spring game, 1 p.m. on Saturday in Tiger Stadium. We will be back on Thursday to take another fresh look, not only at punters. I think we'll probably get a little bit more into the game format, which we hope to know at that point, and things of that nature. So still plenty to talk about. Again, as always, you can find us here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider on all our social channels, specifically our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Please give that thing a search and check it out and hit that subscribe button. That way you can check us out whenever we go live here on Monday and Thursday. And if you don't catch us live, you can catch us after the fact on that same YouTube channel. If you don't catch us there, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever the finer podcasts are found. Please sign up for the LSU newsletter. This is where you get all the headlines from all the teams and all the craziness that always seems to be going on the LSU campus. You can get it delivered straight to your inbox. It's a daily newsletter. Rab handles that himself 3 times a week. So please sign up for it and support your local journalists. You can get it all delivered straight to your inbox. You can sign up at theadvocate.com/LSU